The boardroom was dead silent, except for the steady tick of the clock. Across the long glass table, billionaire CEO Madison Cole smirked, tossing a contract toward Daniel Hayes, the single dad she'd spent the past hour humiliating. "You clearly didn't read the fine print," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply slid the papers back to her and said quietly, "Read the last page." She laughed, until her own lawyer went pale. "Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this. Let's begin." "Mr. Hayes, you're wasting our time," Madison said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I have a billion-dollar company to run. You have a garage." Her words drew a couple of muffled laughs from the executives lining the table. Daniel noticed them, but he didn't react. He kept his eyes on Madison, his hands calm on the table, his breathing steady. "Then you should want to hear what I'm offering," Daniel replied evenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. There was something about his tone, measured, confident, that made even those laughing straighten in their seats. Madison crossed her arms. "And what makes you think I'd ever take advice from someone who changes oil for a living?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Because the system you're about to implement will cost you $40 million in losses before the quarter ends." The room went still. Madison tilted her head, pretending to look amused. "You have no idea what you're talking about." He reached into his worn leather briefcase, pulled out a thin stack of blueprints, and slid them across the table. "Page 14, paragraph 3, he said calmly. "And then the last page." Madison didn't look. She shoved the papers toward her lawyer, Eric Lane, a tall man in an expensive suit with the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. Eric flipped to page 14, scanned it, and then his hand froze mid-turn. His breathing changed. His eyes darted to the last page. He blinked twice, his jaw tightening. And just like that, the color drained from his face. "What?" Madison asked, noticing his reaction. "What's on it?" Eric didn't answer immediately. He closed the folder, placed it gently on the table, and leaned toward her. His voice a low whisper, meant only for her ears. But Daniel watched the flicker of panic cross her face. She straightened, trying to mask it. "This meeting is over," she said quickly. "No," Daniel said, his voice like steel now. "It's just getting started." The executives glanced at each other, sensing a shift they didn't understand. Madison, who had walked into this meeting believing she held all the power, was suddenly gripping the arms of her chair like someone trying not to drown. Daniel's eyes softened for a moment. "Madison, I didn't come here to humiliate you. I came here to help you, and maybe, in the process, help a lot of people who don't have a voice in this room." Her jaw tightened. "And why would you care?" "Because," Daniel said, his voice quiet but firm, "someone once helped me when I was down to nothing. And I promised myself I'd pay it forward. But there was more." Something in his eyes that said this wasn't just about kindness. This was about justice. And Madison was about to find out why. Madison didn't like the way Daniel's words lingered in the air, pressing down on the room like an invisible weight. She had spent her career controlling conversations, directing the flow, always ensuring she held the upper hand. But now, for the first time in years, she felt cornered, and she hated it. "You're bluffing," she said finally, forcing a smirk. "Whatever's on that page, it doesn't change the fact that you came here begging me for an opportunity." Daniel shook his head slowly. You think this meeting was for me? His voice was low, deliberate. It's for the 57 families your next cost-cutting plan would put out on the street. A few of the executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Madison's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before she tightened her expression again. You have no idea how business works. We can't carry dead weight forever. Daniel leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table, his eyes locked on hers. They're not dead weight. They're the heart of your company. The same people who stay late, skip breaks, and make sure your promises to investors are kept. You cut them loose, and you'll lose more than you save. Eric, the lawyer, cleared his throat. Madison. She shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. Not now, Eric. But Daniel didn't miss the flicker of unease in her counsel's eyes. He knew the hook had been set. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a worn photograph. He slid it across the table to Madison. Do you remember her? Madison glanced at the picture and her brow furrowed. A woman in a faded work uniform, hair pulled back in a messy bun, smiled at the camera while holding the hand of a young boy. No, Madison said flatly, pushing the photo back toward him. Daniel didn't touch it. You should. She worked in your logistics division. She was the only reason your supply chain stayed intact during the blackout last winter. She worked triple shifts, and when your restructuring plan eliminated her position, she didn't even get severance. A murmur ran through the room. Madison's tone went cold. If she was laid off, I'm sure it was for a reason. Yeah, Daniel said quietly, because you never looked past the numbers on your spreadsheet. For a moment, the room went still. Madison's hands curled into fists under the table, and she opened her mouth to fire back. But Daniel wasn't done. I'm here because that woman is my sister, he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of every sleepless night he'd seen her endure. And because your company owes her, and dozens of others, far more than a pink slip in silence. Madison's expression flickered. Annoyance, confusion, something almost like guilt. But she pushed it down. Even if that's true, what exactly do you expect me to do about it? Daniel's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. That's what the last page is for. Eric shifted in his seat, his discomfort now impossible to hide. Madison noticed it and shot him another warning glare. But her voice wasn't as steady as before when she said, You're wasting everyone's time. Daniel's tone didn't change. No, Madison. I'm giving you a chance. One I promise you'll wish you'd taken. And with that, he sat back, letting the silence wrap around the table, letting the tension coil tighter with every passing second. The silence in the boardroom was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Madison adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse, trying to mask the tremor in her hand. She could feel the eyes of her board members on her, not with the usual deference, but with something new. Curiosity, doubt. Daniel didn't move. He sat with the calm posture of a man who had nothing to lose and everything already decided. Madison, he said softly, do you really want them to read it in here, in front of everyone? Or would you rather step into your office and spare yourself the spectacle? Her jaw tightened. You think I'm afraid of what's in my own contract? Daniel's eyes held hers. Number, I think you're afraid of what's in mine. A murmur rippled down the table. One of the older board members, a silver-haired man named Leonard, leaned forward. Madison, if there's something here we should be aware of, there isn't, she snapped, cutting him off. Eric cleared his throat again, and this time his voice was firmer. Madison, I think you need to take a closer look, in private. She turned on him like a whip. You work for me. Eric didn't flinch, but he didn't back down either. Which is why I'm telling you. Read it. Daniel reached for the file, slid it toward her once more, and this time, Madison's hand hovered over it. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction, but the weight of her lawyer's tone was gnawing at her. She flipped to the last page. Her eyes scanned the words, and then stopped. A faint crease appeared between her brows. She read it again, slower. The color in her face drained just enough for Daniel to notice. What is this? She demanded. Daniel's voice was steady. A legally binding clause, signed by one of your former VPs before he left. Ironically, because of the same policies that cost my sister her job, that clause states that if evidence of wrongful termination for cost-cutting purposes without proper severance is found, the affected employees must be reinstated, with triple back pay. And guess who's been documenting every single one for the last 2 years? Madison's head jerked up. Me, Daniel confirmed. And not just for my sister, for every one of those 57 families. Gasps scattered around the table. Leonard leaned back in his chair, a slow smile forming. That would be expensive. Daniel's gaze swept the room. Or, he said, his tone softening just enough to draw them in, it could be an opportunity. Fix what's broken. Restore trust. Show the world you don't just care about the numbers. Madison scoffed. And you think this is about kindness? I think kindness is the only reason I'm giving you a chance to make it right before this hits the press. The room erupted into overlapping voices, questions, murmurs, the sharp clink of a pen against a glass. Madison's mind was racing. Daniel had backed her into a corner, and the worst part was, he'd done it in front of her entire board. She stood abruptly. Everyone out. Now. But Daniel stayed seated, calm as ever. Not you, Madison. You and I still have business. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she was the one in control of the room. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind the last board member, leaving only Madison, Daniel, and Eric in the room. The air felt different without the hum of side conversations. Thicker, sharper, almost electric. Madison stayed standing, arms crossed, heels clicking against the polished floor as she paced. You walk in here with a stunt like this and expect me to... What? Apologize? Hand over a check? You have no idea what kind of game you're playing. Daniel leaned back in his chair, utterly unshaken. No, Madison. I know exactly what game you've been playing. I'm just not letting you win this one. Her eyes narrowed. You think you can threaten me? This isn't a threat, Daniel said, his tone level but carrying the weight of something deeply personal. It's a choice. Do right by the people you've discarded, or watch as everything you've built gets buried under the weight of your own decisions. Eric shifted uncomfortably beside her. Madison, he's not bluffing. I've reviewed enough of these claims to know he's got a case, and if he takes it public... Quiet, Eric, she snapped. But her voice didn't have the same bite. Daniel reached into his briefcase again, pulling out another folder, thicker this time. You want to know why I care? He slid it toward her. Open it. She hesitated and then flipped it open. The first page was a hospital bill. Madison's brow furrowed as she skimmed the numbers, tens of thousands of dollars owed. The second page was a photo of a small boy in a hospital bed, smiling, faintly despite the IV taped to his arm. Who is this? She asked, her voice dropping. My son, Daniel said quietly. Eli. He was born with a heart condition. The only reason he's still here is because strangers, people with nothing to gain, stepped in to help us. They didn't ask if it was profitable. They didn't care about the bottom line. They just helped. Madison's gaze lingered on the boy's photo longer than she intended. She closed the folder and set it aside, but her tone softened almost imperceptibly. "And your sister?" Daniel nodded once. "She's Eli's godmother. She lost her job because of a policy you signed off on. Do you know what she did the day after she was laid off? She still showed up at the hospital to watch him so I could go to work." For the first time. Madison didn't have an immediate retort. Daniel leaned forward, his voice lower now, but cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'm not here to destroy you, Madison. If I wanted that, this would already be in the hands of a reporter. I'm here because I believe you can be better than this. But that window's closing fast." Madison turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the skyline. Her reflection looked back at her, poised, powerful, but suddenly uncertain. She'd built her career on being untouchable. Now, for the first time, she felt the cracks forming. "You want me to fix all of this?" she said finally. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Because you still can. And because, if you don't, I will." The silence between them wasn't just tense, it was transformative. Madison wasn't ready to admit it out loud, but something about his words, his restraint, and his refusal to take the easier path of public humiliation was starting to gnaw at her. Eric broke the moment. "Madison, whatever decision you make, you should make it now." She didn't answer. Not yet. But Daniel could see it, the war starting in her eyes. Madison stood frozen at the window, the city sprawling beneath her in sharp, glittering lines. Her reflection looked like a woman in control, but inside she felt the ground shifting. Daniel hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a single empty threat, and somehow that made his presence more dangerous than anyone she'd ever faced. When she finally turned around, her voice was quieter, almost cautious. "If I do this, reinstate every employee, pay them what they're owed, restructure the policies, it will cost millions. The board will tear me apart." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then lead in a way they'll have to follow." She let out a bitter laugh. "You think it's that easy?" "No," he said simply. "But I think it's right. And sometimes, that's the only reason you need." For a long moment, the two of them just stared at each other. Madison saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. Conviction that wasn't for sale. And beneath it, something she couldn't quite name. She looked down at the file again, at Eli's picture peeking out from between the pages. Her throat tightened. "How old is he?" "7, Daniel said, a faint smile touching his lips. "He wants to be a pilot." Madison glanced at Eric, who gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Then she inhaled deeply and let out a long breath. "I'll do it, all of it, but on one condition." Daniel's brow lifted. "Which is?" "You come on as a consultant, temporary, 6 months. Help implement the changes, make sure nothing slips through the cracks." It was the last thing he'd expected to hear. "Why me?" Her eyes narrowed just enough to hide the flicker of something almost like respect. "Because you're the only person who's walked into this office in years who wasn't afraid of me. And because you clearly know how to see the things I've been missing." Daniel studied her for a moment, weighing her words. Then he nodded slowly. 6 months. But if you back out on a single promise, the next time we meet will be in court." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Fair enough." Eric broke in, a touch of relief in his voice. "I'll draft the agreement. Madison stepped closer to Daniel, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You could have destroyed me today. Why didn't you? Daniel's gaze softened. Because someone once gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. And I've learned sometimes the greatest revenge is giving someone the opportunity to do better. For the first time all day, Madison didn't have a comeback. She just nodded, turned toward the door, and called for her assistant. Clear my afternoon. We have a lot of work to do. As Daniel gathered his things, Eric approached him quietly. For what it's worth, I think you just saved this company from itself. Daniel glanced toward the window, where the city stretched out in endless possibility. I wasn't trying to save the company, he said. I was trying to save the people who make it worth having one. And as he stepped out into the corridor, he caught a glimpse of Madison in the reflection of the glass wall, still powerful, still poised, but maybe, just maybe changed. The kind of change that would ripple far beyond a single contract. This ending gives you that real-life, high-stakes payoff. Madison's transformation, Daniel's moral win, and the satisfaction of knowing kindness wasn't weakness. It was the final move that won the game.